Welcome back to The Journey, and so glad you guys are here with us as we're in the middle of our teaching series in the summer called The Dog Days of Summer, right? Summer is upon us. Summer is here. It is hot. It is sticky. Nothing works in the summer like the transit system, right? Or, well, that never works ever, right? But so we've been talking in this series about lots of different stuff. We kicked this off and we talked about stress. How do we deal with, how do we manage stress in our everyday life? We said that basically you can't eliminate stress. It's always with us, but there's ways, biblical tips on how to deal with stress in our lives. We've talked about topics like how do we get rest? Why did God institute the Sabbath in our lives? Last week we talked about priorities. How do we know what should go first and where everything else should fall and filter along? And today what we're going to talk about is the number one thing that stresses us out most, and it's money. Now, how do I know that? How do I know that money stresses us out the most? Well, because I read your connection cards. And the number one prayer request every single week, every single time is, God, help me with money problems, right? The notorious B.I.G., he was right. Mo money, not more money, mo money equals what? Mo problems, right? So more money equals more problems. We all deal with financial stress from time to time. And here's what I'm willing to bet, that over the course of this past month, I'm willing to bet that maybe you've stressed out a little bit about money. I'm willing to bet that maybe you missed out a few hours of your sleep because of worry over money. If you're married or dating, I would guarantee that you've probably fought or had a tiff, right? Nobody fights anymore. A tiff over finances, right? Money tends to worry us out most. In fact, by a show of hands, let's just be honest. How many of you say money stresses me out, right? Anybody here in this room, right? It is the end of the month. So, oh man, we are all stressed out. And the thing about money is not like a car. You know, when you have a problem with your car, you do one of two things. You either kick the car and somehow it gets better, or you ignore it and hope that it gets better, right? But money, it just doesn't do that. You can't ignore your debt. You can't ignore payments. You can't just wish it all to go away. What happens is we carry this pressure around every area of our lives. If we have financial problems, it begins to affect just about every other area of our life. And that's why hope is not a good strategy when it comes to money. Hope doesn't work when it comes to money. What works is a biblical plan. And so let's go ahead, let's pull out our message notes. And I want us to look at some of the words that Paul gave to a young guy named Timothy. He advised him to watch out for certain pressures when it comes to finances. Look at what he says here and see if we could relate today in our society with the same words that Paul is saying to Timothy. He says this, but people who long to be rich, they fall into temptation and they are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Notice it didn't say money is the root of all evil. No, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people craving money have wandered from the true faith and have pierced themselves with many sorrows. Now, that last word, sorrows, that might describe our financial life right now. Like, man, Pastor Mike, I can't say it out loud, but man, I feel sorrow when it comes to my finances. I've got debt. I've got all these things that are just piling on. Student loans are like a pet to me. They know me by name and they won't let go. And this thing called retirement, I haven't even been able to think about it. Pastor Mike, I'm just in too deep and I'm feeling sorrow when it comes to my finances. Now, the goal of today is not to say, shame on you, look at what happened, look at all these mistakes. But the goal is to realize that if you feel sorrow, you're not alone. I mean, all of us here, we raised our hands and we said money stresses us out more than other things. And if you have sorrow about your personal economy or the debts that you're carrying, you are not alone. In fact, you're probably average. Right? The one time in life, average is good, right? Well, not really, right? But the average American, they live paycheck to paycheck. The average American, they carry $16,000 in credit card debt alone. Not mortgages, just consumer debt. The average college student, they graduate with $28,000 in student loans. Right now, 8 out of 10 people would have to put an emergency on a credit card because they don't have the money in their bank account and if an emergency were to happen. 45% of Americans, that's almost half, right now they are not saving anything for retirement. You see, too many of us, we are maxed out, we're stressed out, we're beyond capacity, all because of how we handle our money. And there's a secret to this. In fact, the credit card companies know this. The credit card companies, they will do whatever it takes to keep us from paying off our debt. Why? Because the house always wins. So if they could get you a manageable payment and you could just pay it for the rest of your life, hey, it's all good. We're making money. They got a low monthly payment, and they keep you in this trap, in this cycle over and over and over and over again. Now, speak of the word trap, Paul used that word, didn't he? I mean, we just looked at that word, the word trapped. And in fact, in our notes again, 1 Timothy, he says, but people who long to be rich, they fall into temptation and they are trapped. Circle that word, trapped. The word that Paul is using here is this word called pagus. And the word that Paul is using is almost, this word trap is almost like a bear trap, okay? And I've got a picture of a bear trap right here with words over it, but we got a picture of a bear trap, and I tried to order one online, but the only sites that had it, true story, was like redneck.com or americanredneck.com. It's like, I don't know if I should order that, but this is what a bear trap looks like. You know, it's got the claws. It's got this little thing in the middle where they put the bait and a giant chain behind it. And so what hunters will do is they'll put leaves or some things around the claw so you don't see it. And they'll put a nice piece of morsel, a nice food right there. And so some unsuspecting bear will walk right up. Man, got to get my food. And bam, he is trapped and he is done. Now, today's society, our bait would look a little bit something like this. The next slide, a credit card, right? If we could just get the one credit card, and I know Dave Ramsey, I understand what he says, but this credit card is different. If I sign up for this, I get 20,000 air miles. And if I get that, I could visit my family more. So I'm being a good steward by doing all these things. Or you get the credit card in the mail and it says, spend $1,000 over the first 3 months and we will give you $150 credit. Man, I could use some cash right now. $150. I'm going to sign up for that. Or we're being frugal. I signed up for the cash back card. So every time I spend, every time that I pay it off, I'm getting cash back, right? People who long to get rich, they fall into the temptation and they are trapped by their own desires. Now, the reason why I say that is because this was our story. You know, 11 years ago, Danielle and I stood at an altar before God, our family and friends, and the preacher there, he announced, and he said, I now announce you as husband and wife. And then he should have said right after that, and you're in debt, right? Because that's what we were when we were married 11 years ago. We had just graduated college. We got degrees, but we got student loans right after that to the tune of $40,000 of student loan debt. And by the way, we had both cars. So we had 2 cars with decent monthly payments, but when we really added it up, it was about $18,000 left to pay on our cards. Then we got these amazing deals now that people knew we were married, and somehow American Express, MasterCard, Discover, they all knew that we needed to start off on the right foot. And so they gave us some deals that we couldn't refuse. And then life kind of happened, and well, thank God for the cards. So we just kind of swiped here, swiped there, got a little bit of debt. But wouldn't you know, we got another offer in the mail that if you get this card, you could transfer over from your other debt to this debt. And we played that game. I mean, well, really, they played us, but we played that game. And what happened was 3 years ago, we sat down and we really tried to add up how much debt are we in. And we realized we were about $60,000 in debt between student loans, credit cards, other poor choices. And so we decided, man, we've got to do something about it. We developed a plan. We asked for God's help. We researched Scripture to see how should we be different, because that verse described us. We were trapped. And I'm happy to say that by the end of this year, we will be debt-free. We are pumped. We can't wait. But we say that to help you realize that it is possible that if you're facing debt, you are not alone, but God can help you when we align our lives to his scripture. And to win with our money, what we have to do is change the way that we think. And that's why Paul says this in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. He says, don't copy the behavior and the customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think. So to win with our money, we have to change the way that we think. We don't want to be the rest of the world because the rest of the world is in debt. And so what we did was we studied scripture over the past 3 years. What does God have to say about finances? What does Jesus have to say about money? And what it did was it laid the foundation for financial peace. And I want to share with you 5 tips, 5 steps on how do we experience financial peace, ones that my wife and I followed. And the reason why is our hope and prayer is that you never fall into a situation like this. Take a look.
Number 49.
You know, my last name is Costanza. That's Italian. So you and I are kind of like countrymen. Huh? Paisanos!
650 you change.
Ah, yes. And I always take care of my paisanos. So here's a little something.
Antonio!
Sì!
Vieni qua! Questa miserabile pantalone di casa!
No, sono andato qua! Aspetta, guarda! Hey! You steal my money?
No, you don't understand. I wasn't trying to take it
Yeah,
out.
I know what you tried to do.
No.
Now get out there. Don't come back here again, ever.
No.
I beg you.
So you don't want to face choices like that, right? Awkward moments like George Costanza with money and things like that. So let's talk about 5 decisions that I think we all have to make if we want to experience God's peace in our lives, in our finances. Number 1, the first choice we have to do is recognize that all I have comes from God. I have to recognize that all that I have, all of it, it comes from God. Now, this is a little bit hard for us to do, right? Because we live in a world that teaches us from an early age that if you want something, you got to go get it. We teach people that nothing in life is free, that you have to earn things. And I think this is good. This is important to teach kids, to teach us as we grow up. But what happens that's dangerous is when we carry that mindset for our entire lives, we begin to forget that just maybe God might actually have a hand in every blessing that we have, that everything we have comes from God. Now, again, maybe you're here and you're a little bit skeptical. You're like, well, Pastor Mike, God didn't get me my wife. I got my wife by my charm and my good looks. All right, so every man that is married, we all know this truth that we married way up. How do we marry way up? Because God blessed it somehow, right? God somehow convinced that person that you were the one, right? So don't say, I got this all by myself. That's not true. And if you're not sure about, ask your wife, and she'll confirm that there is a God, all right? But then we say other things like this. Well, I got my job. Pastor Mike, I applied for my job. I got my job by myself. God didn't get me my job. Yeah, but God gave you personality. He gave you drive. He gave you experience that only you have. So really, you got your job. You're in the position you are today because of the God-given qualities that he gave you. And I think the same is true when it comes to money. That everything that we have, including our finances, it comes from God. Now, this is so important because if you don't make this shift in your mindset, you will always struggle when it comes to your finances. And when we realize that everything we have comes from God, it shifts in our hearts instead of greed, and it moves it to God, the author of everything in our life. Look at how James puts this. James chapter 1, verse 17. He says, every good and perfect gift is from myself. No, he says, every good and perfect gift is from above. It's coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like the shifting shadows. So once we understand that everything we have comes from God, then we understand it's his money, not ours. So when we're facing financial pressure and we're facing stress and anxiety and worry over the future, in the end, it's God's problem, not ours. Now, again, you might struggle with this, but truthfully, in one way or another, you already have linked God with your money. Let me give you a couple examples. Maybe this week you heard, maybe you read on social media about somebody's cushy financial situation, or you were at a family gathering and you always love hearing about your crazy uncle and how good life is and how much money they make. And you look to God and you say, God, can you just hook a brother up See, you linked your money with God. Maybe for you, it's you're about to meet with your supervisor, and you're like, maybe they might give me that promotion. Maybe they might give me that raise. So in order to get that promotion, I'm going to do one more step. I'm going to pray to God to get that raise. See, if we pray to God, we're connecting God with our finances. Or maybe you're walking the street and you saw this long line outside and you're like, what's happening? And somebody tells you the Powerball is 500 million. And you're like, all right, I'm going to sign up. I'm going to use biblical numbers. I'm going to pray to God. And if I win, I'm going to give 10% to the church. See, if you're doing that, you've already linked your money with God. And so why do we do it in the extreme circumstances? Why not link God with our financial situation each and every day? So number one, we have to recognize that all we have comes from God. Number two in your notes, the second step is to live joyfully within God's provision for my life. I live joyfully within God's provision for my life. Now, a few years ago, a Gallup survey was done to ask people, how much money do you need to be rich, to feel content? And they started by asking people who made about $30,000. On average, that was what they made for a salary. So they asked a bunch of people, how much more money do you need to be rich? Their answer was $74,000. So then the Gallup survey then surveyed people who made $74,000, figuring, okay, that must be rich. So they interviewed people who made $74,000. They asked them, how much money do they need to be rich? Their answer on average, $120,000. Okay, so then Gallup went to interview people who made $120,000. And they said, how much money do you need to be rich? And their answer was $1 million. So they interviewed $1 million, and they said more, right? And you get the idea, right? That there's this pattern that if we need more in order to feel satisfaction, to feel rich, in the end, we're chasing a moving target. I have a dog, and every now and then he chases his tail for some weird reason. But it's almost that same imagery that if we think we need more money to be rich, we're like a dog chasing its tail going nowhere and only hurting ourselves. And a lot of times we say this, that if I had more, then I would be happy. But that's not the truth. Happiness is a state of mind. Happiness does not come based upon circumstances. If you're not happy, it's because you're not happy. It's not because you don't have this or you need more of that. If you're not happy, you're making the decision to not be happy. And Paul, the apostle, he would talk about this over and over again. Now, I know that we face tough seasons in life, tough situations in life, but Paul, he faced one of the hardest things that you could experience. All throughout the Bible, we see in Paul's life that he was basically imprisoned, he was flogged, he was stoned, not the stone that we think about, like they threw rocks at people, they stoned them, not the other type, all right? Got to be clear. He was shipwrecked. There was a point where he was homeless, he was hungry, he was thirsty. And did all these things dictate his happiness? No. What caused Paul to be happy? Well, he writes this in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. He said, not that I speak in regard to need, for I've learned in whatever state I am to be content. In other words, financial freedom will never be achieved by making more money. Financial freedom is not found in getting that raise and in making more money. Financial freedom is always determined by how you spend the money that you make. And so many times we're so busy getting more that we don't take the time to enjoy what we already have. We're always worried about getting the newer, the bigger thing, the better thing, always moving up, that we don't have time to enjoy what we currently have. And in our culture today, this is so tough to break this mindset. I mean, I've met so many people that overextend themselves financially. Then they add a second job, they add a third job, and they get the apartment that they want, but they don't really spend time with the family, with their kids, as how they want it because they're overextended to pay all the bills. And we do all of this, all because we're chasing a moving target. If you can't be happy with a little bit of money, you're not going to be happy with a lot of it. That's why Paul says this in 1 Timothy 6. He says, tell those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which will soon be gone. Then he says, but their trust should be in the living God. Underline that phrase. Their trust should be in the living God who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. So we recognize all we have comes from God. We learn to live joyfully with all that God has blessed us with. Let's go across the page to number 3. Number 3 is to honor God by giving him the tithe. I honor God by giving him the tithe. Now, I know as you're writing that word, somehow a twitch is coming in your neck. The shakes are happening, right? Oh, man, we brought up the dirty T word in church. I can't believe Pastor Mike went there. And I get it, right? A lot of times we hear the word tithe and we think about bad experiences. We think about, a preacher would talk about money, challenge people to give, but in the end it would be a pyramid scheme, or he was unfaithful with that money. Or maybe at one point or another you bought into this thing called the prosperity gospel, that if I give and it will come back to me blessed and double fold and double measure. And so you did that, but it never really happened, and you just kind of left a little bit jaded. And now I get it. In church today, there's this stigma when it comes to the word tithe. But here's what I want you to do, all right? I just want you to take a deep breath, relax, let that pulse, that heart rate go down a little bit, all right? Turn to your neighbor, tell them it's going to be okay. We're still going to be alive, all right? There's nothing bad that happens with this. But the reason why I think it's so important for us to teach is because in the end, the word tithe is biblical, but also as your pastor, I do not want something from you. I promise that. But what I want is something for you. Now, I shared earlier about our story. How did we get out of debt? Well, let me tell you what we did. We made sure that we always tithed. We made sure no matter what, even though we definitely could have used that money and probably paid off more and done this. In fact, every year that as we kept paying off our debt, we decided to increase our tithe a little bit more each and every year. Why? Because I know that God wants something for you far more than he wants something from you. Look at how he says it. Deuteronomy chapter 14, he says, the purpose of tithing is to teach you to always put God first in your lives. To put God first in your lives. Now, 2 years ago, on my birthday, my parents mailed me a card. Now, you got to admit, right? Every time you check your mailbox or your mail slot, you're always this tension of like afraid to open it. One, because it's going to have all these crazy catalogs. Or two, it's going to have these random bills that you don't know about. But when it's birthday time, man, I love opening that mailbox. Like, what's in here? Try to feel how heavy that card is. What's inside, right? And so I opened up my birthday card for my parents, and it was a gift card to P.F. Chang's. And I was like, man, I like me some P.F. Chang's, but like, the nearest P.F. Chang's is like out in Long Island. There ain't no P.F. Chang's in NYC. So I was like, it's a little weird, but hey, I'll take the P.F. Chang's. And then once I started going through the card and I flipped the card on the back to see how much money was on the card, I noticed someone else's name was written on the card. My parents, they re-gifted a gift and they gave it to their son. And so, Mom, Dad, I know you might be listening to this podcast. I'm here to tell you my heart is broken. My heart is shamed, man. I want a real gift. And I remember opening it up, being like, man, my parents, they re-gifted a gift. But let's be honest. You've done that before. You've got something, you're like, oh, you shouldn't have. What is this? Oh, I'm going to give this to my crazy aunt, And then we re-gift the same thing, and then they open it up, you're like, do you like it? Or you've had it before, right? Where you open up a re-gift, and you're like, man, I'm cutting you out of my Facebook profile now. You are no longer my friend, right? And you feel angry, you feel agitated, you feel upset, right? But the truth is, so many of us, we do that with God. God says, honor me, put me first place in your life. And you're like, God, I got a pretty good re-gift for you, man. God, I know you want me to put you first place in my life, but this month's a little bit tight. So here's what I did with all the faith and all the energy in the world. God, I was frugal this month, so I got $3 left over. God, I'm going to give you my $3. Does that sound good? And a lot of times we don't give God the first 10%. We often give him the last or whatever little percent that we have left. And because we're so strapped financially, we miss out on this important step in our spiritual faith. Now, what exactly is tithing? I think we know, but let me just explain it, all right? Tithing is simply 10%. It's giving God that first 10%. So, for example, if you have $1, 10% is a dime. If you have $100, the 10% is $10. Anything else, you got a calculator on your phone, it'll figure it out for you, all right? But tithing, it's a way for us to remind God and remind ourselves that God, money doesn't have power in my life. God, you are first in my life. Now, look at what it says in Proverbs chapter 3. It says, honor the Lord by giving him the first part of your income, and he will fill your barns to overflow. Now, today, we don't have barns. In fact, if you do, I would like to meet you, actually. But we have lots of different things in our life. And what God is saying is, if you honor me, trust me, I can have this overflow in your life. It could be more money, but it could be other things as well. God fulfills our needs, not our greeds. And what God says is, honor me, and I can do this in your life. So here's what I want to challenge us to do. I want to just give a direct challenge to each and every one of you here today, and it's to step up and begin tithing. Now, why should I tithe? Well, because tithing disrupts the pattern in our minds that says life is all about us, and it helps us realize that life is more than just about us. I mean, if you think about it, all of culture says that money is all about you. You worked hard for your money, so spend your money on whatever you want, whatever makes you feel happy, whatever makes you feel A-okay. And so here's what we do. We take our money, we spend our money on what makes us feel happy and what makes us glad and what gives us a moment. And where does it leave us? We're broken down, we're in debt, and we're miserable. So what tithing says is start with God. He owns all of it anyway. He's just asking you, trust him with that first 10%. Tithing, what does it do? It supplies God's work to be done here in the church. You see what God has been doing at the Journey. God has been doing some incredible stuff. There is no tithing fairy that shows up in our office, gives us a random check, and then flies away. No, everything that happens in our church is because of our faithful members, the generosity of those who call the Journey their home. But tithing also, it proves my faith, or it teaches me to put God first. In other words, what is first in my life should not be my pumpkin spice latte at Starbucks every day. What is not first in my life should not be my Spectrum cable subscription. What is not first in my life should not be my Movie Pass subscription. All those things are important. All those things are fun, but God should be first. But also tithing is one of the greatest ways to test and build my faith in God. So here's what I want you to do. You got a connection card when you came in. Go ahead and grab that connection card. And on the back, you're going to see a couple next steps. And I'm going to challenge you to take one of probably the biggest steps that you could take in your personal life this summer. And that next step, number 2, says, commit to honor God with my finances by taking the 90-day tithe challenge. I'm asking you to try it for 90 days. Well, what's going to happen to my finances in 90 days? You're smart. You'll figure it out. But put God first in this area. Say, for 90 days, I'm going to try it. Well, what if the church is after my money? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you, all right? If you think the Journey Church is really all about your money, then I'm here to say, give your money to another church. I'm willing to believe that much and say it's more about you than it is about our church and our entity. So take this step of faith. If you sign up for it, we want to mail you a book that talks a little bit about tithing and just how do we take those steps, the importance of it. But why not commit 90 days? Try it out. This is not only a test of our faith, but it's also a test of God's faithfulness in our lives. And I don't know about you, but when it comes to God, I would rather lose every single time and let God win every time, right? And so if God says, trust me, let me bless your socks off, let me do this in your life, I'm willing to try him on that, all right? So why not take that step of faith today? All right, so honor God by giving him the tithe. Let's look at number 4. I almost said number 3. Number 4 is commit today to save for my future. I commit today to save for my future. Now, let's face it. Life happens, right? Apartments, they can flood. Kids, they get sick. Cars, what do they always do? They always die, right? Tax season comes, and it leaves us owing more than we had. Right now, this tax season, we don't even know what we owe or what's happening, right? And the thing about these troubles is they always show up unannounced, right? Like, I've never checked my Google Calendar, and it said 3 days out, your car is going to die. No, it's never happened like that, right? Usually, you're driving on the road, and bam, what's happening? Or, you've never had your iCalendar show up and say, hey, watch out because in a month you're going to get this random bill. No, it doesn't work like that. Life always happens. And you could greatly simplify your life by setting aside some amount of your paycheck for a rainy day, a circumstance that comes your way, an emergency. What's the emergency? Not I'm out of pizza and I need more, but no, a real emergency, medical bills, retirement. You do those things, and over time you will be prepared. Solomon says this in Ecclesiastes chapter 11. He says, if you wait for perfect conditions, you will never get anything done, right? And we do this all the time. So a good goal is to live by the 10-10-80 principle. The 10-10-80 principle. 10% goes back to God, 10% goes to saving, and 80% I spend the rest. It might be tough to do in the beginning, but over time it's going to give you a whole lot more simplicity in your life. So commit today to save for the future, and then let's flip over to the back of our notes. Number 5 is I live each day with an open ear toward heaven. I live each day with an open ear toward heaven. The amazing thing about God is that he's always one call away, right? Every time that we're in trouble, every time that we're stressed out, we can call to God. God hears us and he answers us. God is all present, God is all knowing, and God is all powerful. But for some weird reason, God uses us to be his change agents to the world. God is all powerful, but in some weird reason, he trusts us to help those in need. In fact, Jesus said this, Acts chapter 20, verse 35, he says, remembering the words the Lord Jesus himself said, let's say this out loud together. Ready? Go. It is more blessed to give than to receive. It's more blessed to give than to receive. So let me just ask, when was the last time that you blessed somebody just because? When was the last time that you saw someone in need and you realized, man, I could help this person? When was the last time that you spent your money on someone or something other than you? You see, one of the most beautiful things about Christianity is that God calls us to be a blessing to others, because in the end, that is what we are created to do. Now, so many times we think this has got to be big or it's got to be grand, that I got to give a lot to this person or I got to make this to this person. But really, all it could be is something simple. A few months ago, I was walking out of church, and our family tradition after services, don't make fun, our family tradition after services is to go to McDonald's. Why? Because the kids love their chicken nuggets, and that's pretty much all they eat, right? Just chicken nuggets. We're trying to get them to do everything else, right? So we went to McDonald's one day, and my job was just pick up the order, go back to the car so we can go home, because Landon's screaming in stereo, so we got to get him to eat, then go to bed. And I'm walking, and I noticed there's this guy outside asking for money, asking for certain things. And so as everyone else does, just kind of ignored him, walked in. And then as I'm ordering, there's some lady complaining to the manager about this guy who's outside. And I felt like God said something in my heart, just see what this guy needs. So I walked back out and said, hey, what do you want? Like, I'm about to order some chicken nuggets here. What do you want? He could have ordered anything, right? If somebody asked me what I want, McDonald's, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I want like a couple Big Macs and stuff, right? But this guy, he looked at me and said, hey, man, I would love just a big glass of lemonade. I said, man, you got it. So I went in there, bought a lemonade, gave him it, walked away, and that was it. Now, did that put me in debt? Well, no, McDonald's, every drink is $1, right? So a lot of times we're like, man, I'm going to be frugal when God asks me to be generous. Or maybe for me, again, a couple of months ago, it was a hot summer day. We were in Wildwood, New Jersey. The sun was beating down. There was no sea breeze or coast breeze. It was just hot. And we're riding this train, and I noticed the workers, they're all sweating and stuff. And I'm like, man, let's go get some drinks, at least for us, right? And there's something in my heart, God said, just buy a water for the guy. $2, right? Two whole dollars. But I gave it to the guy, said, man, it's hot. Here, I just want you to be blessed. And that was it. Now, it's something as simple as that. Now, did those $2, did they put me deeper in debt? No. But it allowed me as a Christ follower to serve someone who else is in need. And what happened was when I did that, it strengthened my faith as well. And see, I wonder how many times we miss out on growing deeper in our faith, all because we're so greedy and focused on ourselves. I wonder how many times we miss out on being used by God, all because we're worried about our pressures and our financial situations. Well, you don't understand my story. I don't. But here's what I do know. 80% of the world lives on less than $2 a day. I'm willing to bet that you don't live on less than $2 a day. So you are blessed. Your worst nightmare is someone else's greatest dream. And so many times we're so focused on our situation that we forget that God can use us and utilize us to be a blessing. Now look at what Jesus said. He said, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. Then he says this, you cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. Remember Paul's words? Trapped. People who long to be rich, they fall into temptation and they're trapped by their own desires. Jesus tells us the same exact thing. When we follow the love of money, greed, materialism, keeping up with the Joneses, we might not be able to live the life that he has for us. And so ultimately, how we handle our finances is a spiritual issue. It's tied directly to what's inside our hearts. And so if you're facing financial stress this morning, it could be because God is trying to get us to wake up and to give our lives back to him. God can answer our financial pressure, but God says, first, let's make sure everything's right in here. So let's take time right now and ask for God to move in our hearts this morning. Let's pray.